I'm strongly recommending for adolescents to get their 2 doses of vaccine and fully immunized after those 2 doses. This is going to be a long-lasting vaccine. We're seeing that 2 doses is not holding up well. 3rd immunization, the 2 mRNA vaccines were always a 3-dose vaccine. That 3rd immunization, the problem is it's not holding up. A 4th immunization, just to keep them going. 4th immunization, get that second boost. The second boost.
Most important message that I have this morning is get your new bivalent booster. Don't worry so much about the number. A new bivalent one is doing a much better job. You have to get a booster.
Yeah.
You need to get this new bivalent booster.
By the way, if you're over 50 and have gotten 2 boosters and more than 2 to 4 months out, you're going to need a 3rd booster as well, a 5th immunization. I don't think we're going to need an annual booster like flu. It looks as though the boosters are not holding up quite as well as we'd like. And I think our thinking is going to change, and that what's going to happen is every, few months, we may need another booster.
Hi, I'm Nat, and today I want to talk about the online debate that happened this past weekend between Joe Rogan, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Dr. Peter Hotez, who's a vaccine expert that was used by mainstream media a lot during the past 3 years of lockdowns, but whose claims can now be called misinformation by their own standards. So Joe Rogan challenges vaccine champion to debate Robert Kennedy Jr. from the Daily Wire. UFC commentator and comedian Joe Rogan invited a health expert to debate Robert Kennedy Jr., a Democratic Party candidate for president, about vaccines on his popular podcast in exchange for a $100,000 donation to charity. Dr. Peter Hotez, dean at the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, lashed out in response to Rogan speaking to Kennedy about vaccine efficacy and safety during a recent interview on Joe Rogan Experience on Spotify. And if you haven't watched that full interview, it is 3 hours between Joe Rogan and RFK Jr., but it is worthwhile, especially if you don't know much about RFK, because it kind of gives you a good summary of all of his claims.
Have you had anyone debate you publicly about any of these?
Nobody will debate me. For 18 years, nobody will debate me. In fact, I've scheduled many, many debates, and I've asked Hotez many, many times to debate me. And I think you've asked him, here, why don't you debate Robert Kennedy? And he said, because he's a cunning lawyer or something like that. But I've debated Hotez on the telephone with kind of a referee. And, his science is just made up. He cannot stand by it. He can't cite studies.
But the fact that no one will debate you speaks volumes, especially now. They can't say now that you're not popular.
And also, and especially if you disagree with RFK Jr. on his claims about vaccines and Big Pharma, then I would recommend go read his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health, because in it is basically a giant study and summary of all of his claims, and he backs them up with studies. He also has one of the biggest fact-checking organizations that actually do fact checks, and it's not the same fact checkers that do that for Facebook and Instagram and all of the other ones where they put a little message, but rather he has a full litany of real experts from Harvard, Yale, big name institutions that have fact-checked all of his claims and all of the studies that are used in this book. So Dr. Peter Hotez, dean at the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, and this is also the same Baylor College of Medicine that recently lied about not giving puberty blockers and sex changes to underage teenagers and kids. And you can read more about that in the description below. There was an expose with a whistleblower. So these are the kind of people that we're working with here. And he's also the director of Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development, was recognized as a vaccine champion by the American Medical Association last year for his work advocating for vaccines, particularly during the COVID pandemic. On Saturday, Hotez tweeted a link to a Vice article. Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation, tagging the author and saying the report was really true and just awful. And so here's his tweet from this past Saturday, where he says Spotify has stopped even sort of trying. It's really awful. And from all the online attacks I'm receiving after this absurd podcast, it's clear many actually believe this nonsense, says the man that looks like the Nutty Professor. So this is the article that they are all referencing from Vice, who is surprisingly still a news outlet or an outlet at all. And Joe Rogan has actually hosted Dr. Peter Hotez on his show before. And during this conversation, Dr. Hotez actually said that, well, here's what he said about health and how he manages his own health and wellness.
Do you take care of your immune system in other ways? Do you take probiotics? Are you cautious about your diet?
I'm not as cautious about my diet as I should be. I'm a junk foodaholic, actually.
Well, that seems like a terrible thing for your health.
It is a terrible thing for my health, and something my wife is working on.
But that seems ridiculous for someone who works with health.
Yeah.
What's going on with you, man?
Sometimes, man, I just don't get it right.
But listen, you would have a much better argument, don't you think?
You're making my wife stay here.
If you're taking care of yourself 100% instead of just concentrating.
But you still need your vaccines.
I'm sure you do, but vaccines aren't going to prevent cancer.
No, that's true.
Right.
That's true.
There's a lot of diseases.
Or diabetes or cardiovascular disease. Or
and a lot of these diseases are connected directly to diet.
Right.
Yeah. Can't be pushing only chemicals in injectable forms to facilitate health.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Not chemicals, they're vaccines.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's in them?
What?
It's not. I mean, it's some sort of chemical, no?
No, they're antigens, right? They're
What's the fluid?
Macromolecules.
What's the liquid stuff?
Typically, it would be saline or salt water.
Right.
So yes, this man pushing for vaccines and probably in the pockets of Big Pharma doesn't believe that exercise and good nutrition is that important and that we should all just subject ourselves to get shots as many as possible to maintain health. And he doesn't think that actual health is that important at all, apparently. So Joe Rogan tweeted back at Dr. Peter Hotez saying, "Peter, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is misinformation, I am offering you $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit." And after Hotez has replied down here, "Joe, you have my cell, my email. I'm always willing to speak with you." Joe said, "This is a non-answer. I challenged you to publicly because you publicly quote tweeted and agreed that with that Vice article. If you're really serious about what you stand for, you now have a massive opportunity because Joe Rogan has one of the biggest podcast, I think, ever. He gets way more views than a lot of mainstream media shows ever do for a debate that will reach the largest audience a discussion like this has ever had. If you think someone else is better qualified, suggest that person." But Hotez had before, and Joe Rogan also mentioned this. He said, "By the way, Peter Hotez, I saw this tweet that you deleted where he said, 'Be serious, Joe. This is what you throw out for your hunting buddies on a weekend. A $50 million endowment, which you, Spotify, RFK Jr. can easily afford. Not for me, but so we can continue making low-cost, patent-free vaccines for the world's poor.' Preceded by RFK Jr.'s public apology." Of course, he's going to ask that. And then Joe said, "Again, I'm going to ask you very clearly, are you willing to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on my podcast? Because this man just, as the Hodge twins say, he keeps dancing around the question." And so then he says again to Joe, "Yes, Joe, I thought it was over the top, unnecessarily provocative, so I took it down right away. But I've been hurt by the public untrue statements your guests have made about me being a pharma shill when all I do is make vaccines for the world's poor. I don't take big pharma money." He might be able to say that. That is still not a completely proven claim, but of course, his workplace, and a lot of the studies that he has done and a lot of the development that he has done has been paid by big pharma and by NHS and government agencies who are also paid for and lobbied to by big pharma. So he can't escape that claim that easily, but still. And he said, "I'm happy to come on the air. I respect you and your show. I don't want an adversarial relationship. I think we can work well together." Then Steve Kirsch upped the money that Joe Rogan was going to donate to actually have this debate and said, "I will up it to $600,000. But again, The expert apparently doesn't want to debate. But why might this be? Why is Dr. Peter Hotez so against debating if he knows that he has the winning arguments on his side? Well, every time we see these kinds of debates, discussions floating around where there's two sides who both claim to be correct, you have to ask yourself, what does each side have to gain from the claims that they are making? A lot of people on the anti-vaxxer side, which is just vaccine skeptic side, always have a lot of information to give out. I mean, RFK Jr. wrote a whole book about it, so there's that side, and then there's Dr. Peter Hotez's side, where they keep claiming that the science is settled on vaccines, that all the new 72 vaccines on the vaccination schedule for children are completely necessary, and they don't want to debate. They just say the science is settled, vaccines are safe and effective. But we are led to believe by these people like Dr. Hotez appearing on a lot of mainstream media, especially during the pandemic, that there is no debate in science and that science can be settled. When, if you know even a little bit about science, you know that it is an ongoing, changing, ever-changing thing. Science can never be settled. If science were settled, then it really wouldn't be science at all, because we keep discovering things, and that is the process of the scientific discovery of everything. And going back to that question of who has more to gain and lose, well, Dr. Peter Hotez, if even some of the claims that RFK Jr. is making and backing up with scientific studies is saying, if any of those turn out to be true, then not only would it discredit a lot of what Dr. Peter Hotez has been doing and saying and advocating to the public in general, but would also make him responsible for the injuries and potential deaths of millions and millions of children. Not only discrediting him as a doctor and as a vaccine expert, but maybe even possibly putting him in a situation where he could be sued, or even worse, he could end up in jail if people eventually start seeing the light and saying, yes, we should prosecute people that have injured others through their medical profession and through them being experts and saying that the science is settled, when in reality, they knew all along that that wasn't 100% true. And now, well, let's see the other side. What would RFK Jr. lose if he was incorrect? Well, he'd be incorrect. But during this whole time, even when he started his vaccine efficacy advocacy and just trying to look for answers, a lot of people went against him, even members of his own family. And now he's running for president, and any good political advisor would tell him to not touch on his anti-vaccine stance or his vaccine skepticism stance. I mean, he is risking a lot by putting all of this on more public platforms. So this is actually all working against him, but he's still continuing with this message. And he is the one that is willing to debate, even though it comes at a potential risk to his political campaign and even his political career in general. So what does he have to gain? Well, he has to gain that maybe he can expose some corruption, probably a lot of corruption. Maybe he can help some parents make better decisions for their health and their children's health and their futures, and that he would be proven right. But other than that, there's not much that RFK Jr. has to gain, even if he is in the correct, and if he does ever get to debate Peter Hotez or anyone else who is skeptical or who calls him an anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist, and that goes against what RFK Jr. is saying. If he ever got to debate any of these people, again, he wouldn't gain much, but the American public and the public in general would maybe gain a lot by knowing how and why all of these institutions are so corrupt. And again, you can go see that already in his books and interviews, but he would now have a more public platform to expose a lot of the things that are being done without a lot of people knowing about them. People are waking up, and that people are going to be asking more and more questions. And when they do, we have to see where all of these supposed experts that didn't want to debate and didn't want to discuss will end up. If they end up either in jail or discredited, or maybe just sued by a lot of parents that have now had their claims and their questions answered by those people that wanted to look at more studies, that wanted to look for more information, and that have been doing this work for years and years, like RFK Jr. has, and now Joe Rogan as well. But for now, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.